My name is Diogenes Legaspi, and I will be presenting on the country of Cuba. Cuba is an island in the northern Caribbean, known for its art and music. While previously inaccessible to the U.S., it is now open to U.S. tourists, with only some traveling restrictions. It is very close to the U.S. and is located only 90 miles away from Key West, Florida. Cuba was first discovered by Europeans during Christopher Columbus's explorations in 1492. With the U.S. growing as an independent nation, the collapse of Haiti as a sugar-producing colony, Spanish protective policies, and the ingenuity of Cuba's Creole business class, Cuba was able to rise and become one of the largest sugar producers in the 19th century. Currently, it has a population of 11.2 million people. In this population, about 64% are white, 27% are mulatto or mixed, and 9% are black. Cuba is also a world leader in sustainable ecological practices, such as transitioning from agricultural imports to lower footprint, sustainable farming. It is one of the first countries to replace incandescent lighting with more energy efficient fluorescent lighting. Cuba follows a socialist economy, with the state having control of most of the resources and the government being in charge of employment. However, there has been small recent private ownership of homes and cars. Its main industries consist of food production and industrial products. Economic reforms such as cuts in state sector jobs has led to the rise in self-employment. Cuba's main religion is Catholicism, although one of the leading religions is called Santeria. The following part of this presentation will focus on three topics: Cuba's struggle for land, which includes information about changing land reforms and policies; U.S. interventions in Cuba, which will explain its origin and significant instances of such interventions; and lastly is education and healthcare in Cuba, which provides information on specific features about Cuba's education and healthcare system and what distinguishes it from other countries. Furthermore, it will discuss the areas where Cuba especially succeeds. As mentioned earlier, Cuba's economy features a mainly socialist economy, meaning that the state or government controls most of the resources and employment. Private ownership and limited foreign investment are present in Cuba, but were not officially or legally recognized to much extent. However, the new constitution that passed in July will free up the market in residential private property. The new reforms will hopefully drive a new generation of entrepreneurs and improve the sustainability of the country's socialist policies. The changes, however, do not imply a totally free and open market. Unfortunately, Cuba still faces a severe housing crisis and is unable to provide enough resources for major housing programs. In order to fix this, Cuban authorities have lowered minimum requirements for new regulated houses, established a home improvement subsidy for the poorest, and relocated residents to new housing developments. Despite the state's opposition to foreign ownership, an emerging property market in Cuba has been mainly caused by homegrown investment. In some locations, averages, average wages for humans are only 35 US dollars. In order to offset these super low wages, Cuban property owners rely on the informal economy, also known as La Bolsa Negra, by charging several times the amount for foreign tourists to stay in their residence. The next topic being discussed is U.S. intervention in Cuba, which largely began after Cuba's 10-year war against Spain, which failed to gain independence for Cuba. Strains in Spanish-American relations led the U.S. to enter the conflict in 1898. The U.S. then grew interested in the island's economic promise, and after emerging victorious in the Spanish-American War, expelled Spain from Cuba. After about 5 years of U.S. military occupation, the Platt Amendment was passed and gave the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuba's internal affairs when they see fit. After ousting Fulgencio Batista in 1958 and staging a coup and canceled elections, USSR-backed Fidel Castro gained power over Cuba. With Cuba being only 90 miles from U.S. soil, Eisenhower and the U.S. government feared a communist state so close to its territory. And as a result, Eisenhower began CIA plots to assassinate Castro directly. Kennedy continued these plots during his term, with his most famous being the Bay of Pigs, where he had CIA-trained exiles to invade Cuba's Bay of Pigs. The other plot was Operation Mongoose, where he enlisted help from the Mafia to bring down Castro. All of these attempts, unfortunately, were unsuccessful. The next topic we will be discussing is education and healthcare in Cuba. Illiteracy in Cuba has dropped from 23.6% to a mere 3.6% after the end of Batista's term. That's almost 20%. And now, Cuba has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. Education in Cuba is mandatory through 9th grade, and then children have the choice of advancing into a pre-university program or a vocational school. The best part is, education is free throughout each Cuban citizen's entire lifespan. And because of these factors, Cuba is responsible for providing a large number of doctors, engineers, and professors. In regards to healthcare, Cuba spends only $813 per person annually, in comparison with America's $9,403. That's less than a tenth of what the US is spending. And despite this and having less advanced medical equipment, its doctor-to-patient ratio surpasses many developed nations and even rivals the United Kingdom's. Cuba can also boast about having nearly identical average life expectancy as the US. To conclude, I learned mostly about Cuba's economic system and how much Cuban history has influenced and shaped it. Cuba, like many of the other Latin American countries, has been greatly impacted by US intervention, and I believe that the US influence became strong enough to create changes to the system that has been established by the Castro regime. This is what I believe factored into the new constitution, recognizing private ownership despite the deeply instilled socialist economic system. Cuba is changing for the better, and I think will continue to surprise by catching up to the developed nations in aspects that they are behind on. Eventually, it will make changes toward a more free market and bounce back from the inherently flawed system put in place by Castro. Cuba has already made significant advancements in education, health care, and ecology. And I believe that the key to solving their problems with their economy and housing is the expansion of their trade market and opening up more opportunities for big companies through private ownership. This course has surprised me by proving many of my misconceptions wrong. Through that, I've gained knowledge on how Latin American people from different countries feel about gay marriage, for example, and how it was more opposed to than I could even imagine. But mainly, I learned about the many crises happening in Latin America that I would never have known about if I didn't take this course. These next slides just include the bibliography. And that concludes my presentation.